Good morning. My name is Paul Ryan. I'm from Newman University in Birmingham. Newman University is perhaps, well, one of the things we need to think about is how crowded the spaces in the UK in terms of universities. We have about 150 universities now. Newman's different in that it's a small niche university. We have about 3,500 students. And our particular focus is around formation. So that's formation of students, but also formation of the staff at Newman University. So it's looking at the member of staff and the students in the whole. So not just their academic qualifications, but looking about how we best prepare them for the world of work and outside when they've finished their studies. And so that perhaps makes us slightly different. We're also a Catholic foundation university, and we're part of a network of Catholic universities around the world. We're doing some work in China and some work in the US, but limited. I think for me, one of the most important things that came out yesterday was this use of the word relationships. That's very much what Newman's about. It's about developing relationships with institutions, and from those relationships, long-term relationships that benefit students and staff. So it's not about how many numbers of students we get into the institution, it's about the quality and diversity of the relationships that we develop within our partner countries. So that's Newman.
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Murthy.
Thank you, Chairman. I spent most of my professional time in IIT Delhi, incidentally. For 42 years I was teaching there. And so my experience is basically on several of the activities I undertook in IIT Delhi, teaching, research, curriculum development, course development, and so on. And I also had visiting assignments in University of Calgary in Canada, University of Ryerson University, and I was Director of Electrical Research Development Association, Baroda, which is a industry-run research organization. I was heading that for on deputation from IIT. I was also the first director of the NIT Surathkal, again on deputation from IIT. I was the Vice Chancellor of a central university in Karnataka. So, and I also spent, I was interacting with UK on some Indo-UK projects, and also I spent 3 summers in General Electric R&D Bangalore, and I spent a year at Kirloskar Electric industry. So I'm just trying to tap on the my association with industry, and also with the academia, and also my linkages with I visited quite a few of these foreign universities in Japan, USA, Korea, Singapore, and Australia, and so on. I was heading an Indo-Australian team on an energy, and we had worked out on these things. So I am incidentally very passionate about this subject of internationalization. I think I will share my thoughts later. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanna?
Thank you. So I've been watching the development or changes to legislation in Indian higher education now for some years, starting out when I was working for the British Library, and we had an agreement with the National Archives and National Library in India to digitise the records, 14 kilometres of records of the East India Company all the way through to government and independence. And so I got to know universities reasonably well through conducting workshops across India on behalf of this project. And I then worked for the government and have been sort of watching as some initiatives have done incredibly well and others have sort of fallen by the wayside. And I think we'll come back to for example, the resurrection of the Foreign Providers Bill and what that's meant to be doing for internationalising Indian higher education. But I've also seen a great pragmatism at work. I've seen absolutely brilliant departments and universities across India doing fantastic work. And I suppose one of the challenges will be around the inequalities between the primary and secondary parts of education and some of the brilliance that is displayed in Indian higher education. And leading on from that, the need to build a research capacity and culture in India so that the brilliant people working in Indian universities in, say, 10 years' time might have had their postgraduate experience in India rather than overseas. At King's, where I am Vice Principal, we are a research-intensive university. We're the second oldest university in London. We were founded in 1829. We're one of the top 20 universities in the world, if you look at various different types of rankings. Not in all of them, perhaps in some of them we're in the top 30. We are a very international university. We have students from over 130 countries, and they make up about 25% of our population, and we have over 40% of our faculty are international outside the EU. So we are rooted in London, but we're also a very international university. It's part of our DNA, I think, and we very much value that. We also have very strong relationships in India, very deep partnerships. We are not, we might come back to this again around the foreign campus model. King's is committed to having deep partnerships and reciprocity. We're not interested in having a campus overseas, but we are interested in innovative kinds of partnerships that might bring up new types of relationships that might happen through a liberalisation of the Indian HE legislation. At the moment, for example, we have an India Institute in the UK which focuses on contemporary India, and Sunil Kulnani, its director, does absolutely fantastic work. They've just done a BBC series on India, which is quite brilliant. But we also do a lot of research with partners in India. We have summer schools, for example, with the Tata in cancer, and with the Indian Institute of Sciences in infectious diseases. So we're branching out into postgraduate summer schools as well as the undergraduate summer schools we already do. And I think that those postgraduate summer schools might well then lead into the kinds of partnerships or relationships that would bring in a permanent postgraduate presence in India as opposed to them coming to the UK for their postgraduate study.
Thank you. Tara.
Hi, I'm Tara Beteille. I'm a senior economist at the World Bank, based in the headquarters in Washington. So the World Bank does two main kinds of things. One is it works in operations with governments. It makes loans and designs. What's this? Doesn't seem as if I would
Switched on.
This one better?
You were audible though. Can you hear me in this one? Okay, perfect. Then I'll just use this one. So my name is Tara Beteille, and I work with the World Bank, based in the headquarters in Washington. So the World Bank does two main kinds of things. One is it works with governments and projects, and the second is it does a lot of research work that is supposed to inform this work that it does with governments. So I am engaged with a number of projects in higher education in India. There are two in technical education and one in Madhya Pradesh that is higher education. And there are a number of problems that we try to address through these projects, specifically student learning and employability, the quality of research, and of course equity. My main interest in this session and in understanding what internationalization has to offer is to understand how we can address these challenges using different mechanisms within internationalization.
Thank you. So we'll, as of this moment, the session is open for questions. So if any of you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to jump in. I'm going to say a couple of things, and then I'll start this off with the question that I'd like the panelists to address. You'll have a chance to read in the report, CII along with the Association of Indian Universities is releasing a report today on the state of internationalization of Indian higher education, and it makes pretty grim reading, particularly in terms of student mobility, where while around the world student mobility continues to increase significantly, and new education providers like China have become very active in attracting students from around the world. In fact, the number of students coming to India continues to decline, foreign students, international students coming to India continues to decline year on year. I think this last year was the first time that international students enrolling for degrees programs in India dropped below 5,000. I think we're close to about 3,000. In contrast to the 300,000 Indian students who go abroad every year, they spend somewhat like 60,000 crores. Just to put that in perspective, that is twice the amount of the allocation for higher education in the union budget every year. So our students, basically our best and brightest students, are turning their backs on our best institutions and are going abroad and spending a significant amount of money. But before we go into any of the details, I just thought I'd give you an overview. Please take a look at that report. It's an excellent report. We're going to release it later on. But I'd like to begin this broad discussion of internationalization by asking the panelists, what is their understanding of internationalization? What do you think it involves? What should we be focusing on in the Indian context? Because it's a very, very wide scope, ranging from student mobility to collaborative research programs, to the presence of foreign providers. All of those things are wrapped around. So perhaps starting with you, Tara, this time, talk a little bit about
you would start from there, and then I could pick up the last bit.
Sorry, I'm going to fix this around as we go.
Right.
So, what's your thoughts on what should we be thinking about when we think about internationalization in the Indian context?
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll answer the question from a somewhat World Bank perspective and how we think about it in our projects. So as I'd mentioned, there are three main objectives all our projects have in terms of addressing. One is student learning and employability, the second is research, and the third is equity. And if you look a little bit behind these main outcomes, so to say, the key challenges are institutions just don't often have autonomy. They cannot make their decisions on their own. They're always told what to do. Their objectives are set for them, and the means of getting to those objectives are set for them. The second part is that faculty vacancy rates are really high. Not only are these rates high, and when I say high, I'm talking about approximately 50% in a number of state-run engineering colleges specifically. Those who are in those jobs are often not qualified well enough to perform those jobs, many of them. So they have students who often are much brighter and smarter than faculty and feel demotivated. Then there are also faculty who themselves are very good, want to work, and the system just doesn't allow it. Motivation problems. In addition to this large faculty vacancy problem, the one way in which it has been addressed is, of course, through guest lecturers. So whenever you look at numbers that the government will provide you or that are raised in parliament questions, you'll get faculty vacancy rates of 5 or 10% because they've all been filled up by these sort of guest or ghost lecturers, whatever you want to call them. Again, undermining the capability of the system to perform. So if you, and the third big part of it is that there's just not enough money in the system as well. So these are the three key problems. And how does the bank, through its projects, try to address them using what is our broad understanding of internationalization? One has been, of course, through trying to build up exchange programs between faculty and between students. We have a program with MyTax in Canada with students, going very well so far, but it's been difficult to expand the number of students in that program. We've been working hard for faculty exchange, but the main problems that come up are which faculty should go in a college for a faculty exchange program. It's very rarely based upon what a faculty's work program is actually about and what their interest and ability is about. Who is better networked in the college's administration tends to be the one chosen to go for that program. Even once they've been chosen, it's often very difficult for them to actually get permission to go abroad from the government, to use government money if they're in a government engineering college, for instance, to go abroad. So these, on the one hand, there are all these quality problems, who goes, and then there are these logistical problems. Okay, suppose you have actually got a good person to go. It's so difficult to get the permissions and the files moving. So in our projects, we've tried to simplify that a little bit. We've suggested that the Board of Governors be given a lot of leeway in determining these factors. The second way, so this was about exchange. The second way in which our projects would like to, we would like to explore this more, we haven't done enough of it, is how can we have high quality institutes across the world come and help build up high quality institutes in India with local counterparts. There are a number of pretty high quality institutes in India as well, right? If you look at the IIMs and the IITs, they didn't start by themselves. They did get some input from universities abroad. And similarly, how can we leverage on universities abroad, diaspora abroad, as well as what exists locally to be able to develop really high quality centers of excellence. So these are the two main things that we've been exploring in our project so far.
Thank you. Joanna?
I think I'm going to try and answer the question from the opposite end in some ways, because I'm not going to speak for Indian HE, but in the UK, we're very proud of the independence and autonomy of our sector, which perhaps is changing slightly with the funding model, but we still are, nevertheless, the appointments are independent, and the being sort of constrained in terms of, for example, permission to travel, permission to do research and teaching activities is not so much of an issue as the funding environment, which is very much an issue for the UK. So why do we internationalise? Well, I don't think there is a university in the UK that cannot be to some extent international, reflecting a global world, a world which is mobile, a world where students face the prospect of working for at least several employers and probably in many different countries. So we internationalise in different ways. Our research is just, by its very nature, has to be international. And what's interesting in the internationalisation space there is that there are funding agencies around the world are clustering their funding to concentrate on, for example, global warming, particular research themes. And so a strength of the international partnerships that universities can do is that you come with your own local experience and you bring that together with your partners in China or India or anywhere in the world, and you come up with, hopefully universities have a massive role to play in solving global problems. So that's one very strong reason for internationalising. Another, of course, is teaching and employability, which are linked but not the same thing. The curriculum that we teach has to reflect global priorities and global challenges, and it also has to be attractive to an international student population that we have. So we have to support our teachers and our students who learn in different ways and come from very different backgrounds, and that again is, I think, a massive strength in students who come to learn. They come to develop, they come to learn life skills. They're actually understanding from each other that we live in a world which is full of inequities and is not flat. And I think that's part of the valuable experience of being at university. One wants to be at an international university. Cultural exchange and life skills, I think I've sort of brought up. When we work with universities, and this is increasingly changing, you can see in the BRIC countries, for example, with institutions in China, many times senior administrations are now have had their education overseas and have come back. And the two main planks of internationalisation seem to be Anglicisation to an extent, which I regret to some extent, but also bringing in faculty to those universities. And that sort of student and faculty exchange is, I think, one of the really valuable ways that we can work together to help, for example, build capacity in Indian HE. And for the UK and India, frameworks like UKIERI, which is about to, I think, have its third tranche, has been tremendously helpful. In Brazil, there is a scheme called Science Without Borders, which has been famous probably for its undergraduate program, which is very ambitious, but actually it also has a really valuable postdoc program as well, which has been getting postdoc researchers to spend time teaching in Brazilian universities from the UK. And so I think those sorts of schemes help to internationalise and help to rebalance, perhaps, so that in 20 years' time, alongside what Tara's been mentioning about the legislative framework, which needs to give more autonomy to universities, you'll have a more level playing field.
Thanks, Professor Murthy. What should we be thinking about when we think about internationalisation?
Okay, I have flagged a few issues. Actually, I mailed it to Shalini. I'll just present it. Maybe I'll give a copy to you if you require. See, there's no dispute that internationalization is necessary. On that we are not questioning, because that is an important a factor in global ranking, world ranking. Therefore, Indian higher education cannot ignore that at all. Now, we have been talking Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. World is a family as an Indian ethos. So that means international must not be opposed in India, any government. Then Nalanda, Takshashila were international universities which attracted people from all over the world, faculty, students, and things like that. And education globalization is more important than economic globalization. So I feel knowledge has no barriers. Therefore, I think we should emphasize on education globalization first. Then education must produce visionaries and not mercenaries. That would mean you must give them a broader vision, a global vision for the students. And so universities were developed world, North America, Europe, Japan, Korea, Singapore, Australia, and even China have great emphasis on internationalization, and India cannot ignore this aspect. I think in comparison, our performance is definitely very low. Then MIT has a strong international section, for example. In fact, I was having a sabbatical in Canada, and in the university where I was working, the dean told me that in his faculty, only one faculty member is born in Canada. So that is the type of internationalization that has been practiced because of a lot of relevant things. In China, for example, attracts non-resident Chinese professors mostly from USA by giving them almost a similar facilities as they have in USA. But I think they are even attracting NRI professors from USA to work. I know a friend, one Kaushik Rajshekhara, who every summer he goes to China from USA, but he is not even being tapped in India, for example. Okay. Therefore, I think there are issues of concern. Now, what is meant by internationalization? We should understand that it is not just attracting foreign students. That's just one aspect of the thing. I think people misunderstand this aspect. See, presence of foreign faculty in a university, regular and visiting, presence of foreign students and variety of students from different countries, agreements and activities jointly with foreign universities, setting up campuses abroad, independently or jointly with local entities, joint research projects with foreign institutions, internship of foreign students, mentoring foreign universities, distance mode teaching learning process, cooperative programs with the industry, international centers, hostels and facilities, government initiated collaborations between countries, student exchange programs with transparent credit transfer, transparent admission process for foreign students, in-house arrangement to address concerns of foreign students. These are all aspects of internationalization. All has to be addressed, I think. Then internationalization is not restricted just attracting foreign students, as I mentioned. Internationalization brings in lot of goodwill among countries. This is also important. The side effects of internationalization is, for example, foreign students carry a lot of sweet memories back home. See, Afghan ex-president Hamid Karzai, for example, studied in India, and incidentally he had a lot of good soft corner for India. So it is an investment for the universities and the host countries to see that. And this also brings to host institution a lot of revenue to the host institution, because foreign students pay more fees than the local students as an international practice. Okay. Therefore, I think that's what many of the countries, like including US, UK, and Australia, and all, they have been using this as a good source of revenue. Okay. So India need today adjust steps to globally visible in higher education. We should be globally visible in higher education. If Indian universities have to be this thing. Therefore, based on the above parameters, as I mentioned, our impact in this front is dismal at this present. So, according to the Times of India, number of foreign students dipped by 73% from 13,961 in 2013 to just 3,737 in 2014. IISc, a leading institution which has now come under the top 100 or so, has just 25 foreign students. Okay? I think these are factors which need to be addressed, and I hope this deliberations will throw out some of these things. So, I was in IIT Delhi, as I told you. IIT has signed over 100 MOUs with several countries. Okay? But the impact is very, very minimal. Okay? Very few are operational from that point of view. That is true with most of the other IITs also. Therefore, signing MOU is just not the end of the story. Okay? So, we have to have some funds available for the MOUs to operate. There are no funds. Okay? Therefore, and also there must be champions on both sides. Only then it will work. Okay? Otherwise, it will just be a waste of effort. So, what I have listed a few things which need to be done if you want to have Indian institutions and universities to be effective international in this front. Number one, foreign universities bill, which is in limbo for a decade, must be passed immediately. This is a minimum that needs to be done immediately by our parliament. There must be a political consensus and bipartisan support for the country's good. Okay? There is not a disputable thing. If they have some disputes, they can tweak the bill, I have no issues, but it has to be passed. We must identify as a first step 100 leading institutions to be world class, okay, such as IITs, NITs, IIITs, central universities, good state universities, private universities. Let us identify 100. Okay, and they need to be supported. So, let them start this internationalization program as a first step. One. Existing MOUs must be reviewed and activated with financial support. There are several MOUs, it has to be reviewed and activated. Each of the above must reserve, each of the 100 universities must reserve at least 5% seats to foreign students. Okay, and of course, there could be higher components for postgraduate research. This is a minimum I think we need to have. There must be an active international section headed by a dean or a professor. So, in each of these places, there will be an international section. Some IITs have them, but impact is limited. Each of the IITs have international section, but very limited impact, for example. There must be more autonomy and less regulation. I think this is very, very important. I think in most of the Indian institutions, there is more regulation and less autonomy. Okay? In fact, one of the British professors told me that in Britain there is no UGC. They started UGC in India. They have wound up UGC in Britain, but we have not wound it up.
We've got HEFKI. We've got HEFKI.
Yeah, whatever. But I think, this regulation is over-regulated, the education system. There is more autonomy. Autonomy is very critical for all type of institutions. Then each of the above must have the international hostel for foreign students. I think let us not be very, dogmatic about it. Why not have an international hostel so that they get an international ambience, facilities of living, cooking, teaching, and so. Of course, if they live with other students, it's good interaction, but minimum physical facilities must be provided to them. I think I think this is important. There must be a provision to hire foreign professors. Very provision on regular or visiting basis in Indian universities. As of now, it is not so smooth. Okay, so in fact, PIOs are willing to come. Okay, and then foreign universities may be allowed. One minute, I'll just run through it. Foreign universities may be allowed to set up campuses in India, independently or jointly. We must not be averse to create competitors to IITs. Okay, IITs are strong enough to compete. Okay? Therefore, let the foreign universities come and have campuses here. Indian entities such as IITs may be freely permitted to set up campuses abroad. They should, Indian embassies must play a proactive role. Compared to several other countries, their role is presently very passive. In fact, if you go to Washington, maybe our embassy may not even know how many Indian professors are there in America, for example. They have no data. Our students, I think they are not at all playing a very active role in our embassies in terms of propagating education and academia. Okay, joint research projects on consortium basis must be encouraged with other countries. India may use online teaching in distance mode to developing countries IIT Delhi has a program with Ethiopia, for example. We are teaching from IIT Delhi to Ethiopia. Similar other things also. So there are several technology-based teaching learning process that also outreaches you. Special arrangement may be made for SAARC countries. We must also target Middle East. I think Middle East students mostly go up. I think they will be very happy to come to India if we provide facilities like this. And that means India must be made an attractive destination. Number of Indian students going abroad with their own money is increasing, as Chairman said, and this trend may be reversed by improving quality of local institutions. So why do the need to go abroad if you can have an international level of institutions in India? So that will reduce the thing. And emulate practice of other countries. I appreciate, British Council is a good example. They are doing a wonderful job on internationalization of education of UK. Okay? And in fact, I visited UK and I think British Council was so supportive in making us feel very comfortable in return like that. So in fact, we should start an Indian Council like British Council in our country. And housing, food, healthcare, local courtesy are critical for foreign students. They are very simple. Indian ambience can sometimes be hostile. There must be a local guardian for each foreign student. I think this is very important. I was a local guardian for a Bangladeshi student in IIT Delhi. So this system must be there. Faculty, there must be a faculty who will take care of one foreign student. I think that will help a lot. Therefore, ultimately, Athithi Devo Bhava must be the idea. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Murthy. Paul, several things have come up already, and including this issue of foreign universities coming to India to set up campuses. The Foreign Universities Bill has been raised. So perhaps tell us what your thoughts are on what we should be thinking about internationalization. Then talk a little bit specifically about this idea of, let me pose the question particularly to Joanna and to Paul, why would a foreign institution set up a campus in India?
Thank you. I mean, as I said at the beginning in the introduction to why we were here, Newman is new to working in India, and I think the first thing I'll do is to take Professor Murthy's comprehensive notes and take them home with me so that I have a toolkit and an idiot's plan on how to do it properly when we engage. I think for me, one of the things that seems to be coming over is there needs to be clarity of what we mean by internationalisation and international recruitment. I think the two terms seem to be confused sometimes. We've just completed a project for the Higher Education Academy back in England, and one of the things was there was a disconnect between what senior managers, vice-chancellors thought internationalisation was and what managers, students' unions felt it really was. And I think that is that internationalisation is about making the campus, the curriculum, the culture within an institution suitable for its home international students, but also the students that come to study there. And that international recruitment is about international recruitment, and the two things sometimes get confused. And I think it's important that, certainly the way I'm thinking about it, is that we get clarity about what each of those things need in order to be successful, but that the two things are separate. We do deal with the two things in different ways. I think from Newman's perspective, it's about, I was at the conference yesterday and I look at the names of the partners and the sponsors who supported the conference, and I think I've worked for a number of teaching intensive universities who have felt they knew the best way to deal with internationalising the student population, and I think a lot of that has happened in isolation. And I think universities, if nothing else comes from the conference, is that universities perhaps, certainly speaking from the universities that I've worked with, need to work more closely with industry and see what industry want and the type of students that you want us to produce, to help produce, to support, and the sort of skills that we need. So that internationalisation agenda isn't something I think that's prescriptive from universities. It's something that we need to sit back from a little bit and look at industries and talk to industry and see what students need. And I think that's important. So all the stuff about the academic qualifications, I think, are pretty much sorted. I think the relationship between industry and universities needs to be better in order for internationalisation, international recruitment, the two things linked together, for it to be successful. So I think certainly my briefing coming here was to sit back and to listen to what you guys wanted from industry, from universities, and see how we best meet the changing requirements of students, I think. On the issue of campuses, I think it's an interesting one. The universities in the UK are rationalising their home campuses, so many universities who've got campuses around the country are starting to centralise their operation on 1 or 2 campuses. So I think the number of universities who open new campuses, certainly from Britain, in India will be limited. I think what's more important almost is that the foundations and that thing that I talked about before about developing relationships becomes more and more important. That we're dealing 6,000 miles away, and we need to be able to make sure that the foundations that we do are solid and that the programmes and the initiatives that we run from there are successful. So I think there'll be limited building work, but I think in terms of relationships, it's something that we, and I'm talking about it from a Newman perspective here, new universities need to be better at.
Thank you. Joanna, if we do get this time round the foreign universities bill passed, will they be beating down the doors to come? I mean, I've heard Kings say that you wouldn't be interested, but you think other people would be, and why would that be?
I think I'm going to start by winding back to the innovation universities, of which the last HE minister wanted to create, I think, 14 innovation universities, and there was a grand vision to do so. And what actually then happened was a rather pragmatic solution, where innovation happened in a certain designated existing universities and reached out to industry. And so the students had, for example, a really fantastic curriculum. In Delhi University was one example where they have an innovation hub, I think, where they are doing a completely new curriculum, practice-based elements within it, and that's really innovative. So in some ways, I think what I hope for the Foreign Providers Bill is that rather than seeing a massive sea change and suddenly sort of the Indian HE landscape is populated by foreign providers, it actually, again, in a pragmatic way, helps to increase competition to drive up quality, which is, I think, the founding principle for the bill, without taking away the best that Indian HE administrators want to do. In terms of a more general approach to campuses overseas, I think that you have to kind of divide them into different camps. There is a model of development where a country is developing its higher education system and it needs help, and it needs consulting, it needs curriculum development, it needs content, it needs advice. And there are various ways of doing that, which will continue. And usually the way that that's done is that people will then come in and help, and then at the point where a country or a system is able to do it themselves, they will go away. And that's happened in Malaysia, it's happened in the Gulf. There are many examples where UK and other Indian providers as well provide capacity in a transnational education way. And I think that that's great, and it should continue. In terms of the sort of flagship universities that wish to sort of put up a flag somewhere and say we have a campus in Delhi or we have a campus in China, I think that model is changing, and I've spoken to Christine Enyu, who is the dean of the provost of the Nottingham campus in Ningbo, and she would say to you if she was here today that it's a fantastic model and it did very well for Britain-China relationships. They were the first to establish a campus there, and they have actually increased the flow, importantly, from Nottingham to China as well as from the other way around. But that those kinds of relationships should now evolve into partnerships where it's really a sort of hybrid model between an institution wishing to come in and work with an institution in another country, and they create something new out of that partnership.
Right. So, yes, of course.
See, there's one. I have been interacting with many of these foreign players. Mr. Todd, who was in the Australian embassy in Delhi. In fact, myself and Prof. Nataraj, we went for an Australian delegation, etc. He told me that we are all flying on the top. We are just waiting for the landing rights. Okay? This is the statement. And I think there is a lot of interest of quite a few of the foreign universities to have their presence in India. I think it's how we match this interest. That is what is it. Deepak Diwan of some of the PIOs, professors who are there, they are also working at University of Waterloo, for example, Georgia Tech. They are all wanting to, and some of the MIT has a big presence in NUS Singapore. Therefore, I think there is no dispute that there is an interest, but how this interest is translated to action is what is the crux.
Happy to take questions from the audience. Yes, ma'am.
also like to bring in the question of the central universities, and I represent one, where we really don't have any restrictions on freedom of having MOUs and foreign exchange of students and our faculty going. So I think we should just bear in mind that there are a range of universities, and these range of universities, public in particular, as also private, they have to be kept in mind. That was that one thing.
You have missed the point. Out of the 100 universities which are listed, I have registered central universities also.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's why I pointed to your thing that you corrected. The second point, and I think I would like to ask the panelists, is a point again with Professor Murthy. Our university experience internationalization doesn't really mean the Western, very well-developed countries coming to us. We have a whole range of students coming from Ethiopia, Kenya, the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Yemen, and nowadays they are not able to go back. I mean, the statistics from Hyderabad will show you how the Yemeni consulate has to come and do their doctorate degree distribution in Hyderabad rather than going to Yemen. So what we'd like to suggest over here is, what would the panelists have to say about internationalization, where India can be a very, very important resource thing for countries which are troubled countries currently. And secondly, what about open learning and with our satellite technology? I think our students go abroad and are received so well. That's primarily because we have the wherewithal to provide that kind of education. So what would you all think about India internationalizing by becoming a node for open universities rather than physical campuses? So these are the
Actually, in my write-up, I have listed all these issues.
Thank you. Tara, would you want to respond to that?
Yes, yes, of course. You're right, ma'am. There are many different types of universities and institutes. In terms of can India be a node for attracting people from troubled countries and other countries, I think a lot of the same problems come in, right? In terms of what do we have for quality assurance? What do we have in terms of ensuring that students from within our country can also have equal access? What do we have in terms of understanding the financing of that education? I think it's a good idea, and it would be nice to have it. But we haven't, we also need to solve what the core problems are, which are, is there really going to be that kind of faculty? Are we going to, what is our accreditation based upon? How? I think so. That is the important point, right? I think within this room we all have some very concrete and good ideas, but when it actually comes to the ground and implementing it, it isn't that easy. And believe me, we've looked at a lot of data. Students are supposed to have most of their money covered, not the ones that you spoke about coming through from Yemen and other countries, but Indian students, they actually pay a fair amount out of pocket for a range of things. And because it's all haphazardly organized, it keeps coming every month, the payment things. I do want to come back to the point about quality assurance. If we begin to become a country which attracts students from abroad into our universities and our colleges, what mechanisms do we have in place to ensure that they're actually getting what they thought they'd get, and how do we maintain the reputation?
I wanted, Joanna, the second point that was made about the possibility of technology-based open learning exchanges as an alternative to the formal sort of physical student mobility and faculty mobility that we've had, both Joanna and then Paul to respond to
okay.
that. If you get a chance.
Yes, well, it is changing. Disruptive technology is making learning a different experience. All universities are less adept at dealing with it than smaller private companies and private universities. And there will be a massive change in how learning is delivered, and we're seeing it happen now. And of course, it will have an impact. And I think particularly relationships perhaps between universities and smaller providers. There is a massive demand for higher education, huge, and there is also no possibility of supplying it in the traditional ways. I mean, if you look at the 4 million people who now study abroad, they're not all going to traditional centres, and there is a move, the mobility is moving to hubs in Singapore, in China, in other countries, and it's only a matter of time, I think, before it will also, people will come to India. But of course, working in different ways will matter. I have to say, it sounds sort of like a bit of a dinosaur, but I would also put in a plea for the traditional study-based learning in an institution, because I think it's a huge privilege to have that, but it's a privilege we should keep, because I think it, just as we value higher education as a measure of our civilization, I think having that experience as a student of having several years where you can study and also learn other things is extremely valuable for life.
So just, I think we live in difficult times, don't we? And I think we have, as a sector, we need to be receptive to the changing requirements of our students who are coming in, and how things change while they study, and the circumstances that they're presented with. I think is important. As a small, one of the small institutions that Joanna talked about, I think one of our benefits is that we're able to be more nimble in the types of way we deliver our programs, and so we have a significant number of programs that are distance taught, and that we use a blended delivery method. Our students in the UK are saying that they want to return to a more traditional approach of face-to-face and a closer relationship with their tutors. So we've made the decision to have small class sizes, 1 to typically 25 students, and that goes for our home and international students on all our programs. And I think that relationship between an institution and its students is important. And while some students benefit greatly from large lecture theatres of 100, 150 students, some students want to come to a small institution where that relationship that Joanna talked about is the main reason why they come, to be in a safe environment where they can develop a relationship with their tutors and their professors. And so I think it's horses for courses. It's different types of universities, different types of providers will meet requirements of a different type of student. And to lump everybody in together and say we'll all do DL programs, we'll all do blended programs, is probably not the best way forward. And so there is a place, I think, in this crowded sector for different types of institutions offering different types of provision to the students, whether they're home students or international students.
Professor Murthy, you already mentioned the idea of online PhD programs that we offer to other countries. What about allowing our students to enroll in online programs offered by international institutions and to enhance their learning?
Yeah, I think, we should be open. Whatever India can interact with the advanced countries in one form, with the developed in another form. Both models have to be excellent and make it show. And I think, as I told you, IIT Delhi, I know, is having a very successful program in Ethiopia, for example. I'm sure many others are also doing in some form or the other. Now the point is, education should not be a charity. As you say, scholarship, this thing, helping these poorer, these things. But I think the people of Middle East are rich enough, for example. They would rather go to USA, etc., than come to India. But though it is much cheaper for them to have a similar, almost similar, in IA, if you say they come to IITs and things like that. So why not we open up these things, And I think we should not be dogmatic. One of the problem is our people are politicians and academicians, academic politicians. They all tend to be highly dogmatic and structured in some of their own philosophies of things. I think we should be open. And that's what is important.
I'm going to appropriate the phrase academic politicians for future use over there, and then you, sir, please.
The point which is basically missing is, if you want to have the total ecosystem, because internationalization of education is going to add sustainability, overall sustainability, and sustainability to both humanity and as well as humankind and everything. Education is going to power everything. So from that point of view, there are several programs which were started by World Bank, like for example TechCoop, which is trying to get into the Indian system. And I think it's a matter of time that the TechCoop becomes successful. It's not going to give the results within 10-15 years. It is a long-term process. If I understand, the education system takes long-term if you want to make it more effective. So I would rather suggest, if you can tap with the middle tier institutes like the regional institutes and NITs and make them strong and give IITs a run for their money. I mean that probably would be the best, one of the best way that to do the internationalization of education, because we need to give some run for money to the IITs also.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yes, well, ICT is one of our star institutes in TechCoop, but many of the other colleges are in fact what we would say mid-tier, and we've been working on various fronts, mainly in terms of building up autonomy within the institution, accountability and faculty development and student opportunities and research to be able to push them up. This is TechCoop 2. We are going to go into TechCoop 3, where the focus will be even more on low-income states and institutes in those states and how we can raise them. And one of our mechanisms will also be to work with institutes like ICT to see how we can find serious mentoring relationships between institutes. So that is to answer that question. Can I quickly also say something on the MOOCs question? Of course. So I think MOOCs and what was raised earlier, it's pretty important. But one fact about MOOCs, and this is coming out of Stanford's president, who said that we try and do this as well as we can. And Coursera comes largely out of Stanford, but it's still 10% of people who complete. That's the average completion rate. Now the question for us to ask as well, if it's 10% of 100, that doesn't look very good, but if it's 10% of a million, that looks pretty good, And then going into that, looking at who are the people who are actually completing it. And it turns out that there are some categories that seem to finish or complete MOOCs more than others, and one of those categories are teachers. And then to think in terms of designing programs for teachers. For whatever reason, teachers are just used to or take to this more than other kinds of students. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us to be able to think of how to design faculty development programs. And I also want to speak to what Joanna was saying a little bit, which is that we need some classroom component because, it's not just what's happening on the blackboard that gets transacted in a classroom. There's a lot of culture and learning that happens, and that's very important to preserve. And cannot agree more. We are trying to do that. Again in TechCoop with IIT Chennai, there is something called I never get this right, but Quality Education Enhancement, there's a 30, it's QEEE, which is a sort of blended MOOCs model where there's a classroom component and there is an online component. And it focuses on students, but we get a lot of positive feedback from teachers on how they're actually learning how to teach students.
Professor Murthy, what can we do to improve the quality of education in the non-elite institutions in the country, right? In the non-IITs? What needs to be done? What should our focus be?
I was about to respond to this. I was founder director of NIT Suratkal. I went from IIT. In fact, at that time, I think Professor Natarajan knows that quite a few IIT professors volunteered to head these new NITs. But there was a change of government and they were asked to go back, incidentally. This is also, I also went back to IIT. Now the point is, I have seen IIT and NITs, just for example. The quality of students entering to IIT, NIT is no different. They are equally good. Okay? It is the only thing we have to create the other ambience. One is they try to have them the quality faculty and quality funding. Okay, and quality ambience. Create a IIT culture in NIT, I think it is possible. It is not, that's why I have listed in my document, let us identify 100 institutions to be brought to world class level. Let that be our exercise number one, which may include IITs, NITs, IIITs, ISERs, private universities, joint ventures, foreign universities. Let them all be there. But let us create a competition among them, and then it is possible. And give them the same autonomy. I think, and less regulation. It is possible to do it, I am convinced, because our teachers are quite good, our faculty are quite good, a large number, and it is possible they can be internationalized. But it requires a real thrust and a policy.
I'll come back to the issue of faculty availability in a second, but you had a question there, ma'am.
Good morning, all. So I have a slightly more pragmatic take on the discussion which has been happening, which is very enlightening. Lots of new thoughts and ideas and some revisiting of old thoughts. Just to give you a bit of a background, I was an international student in the US and then a faculty member in the US teaching German, sending Americans mainly to German-speaking countries. And now I've come the full circle and I'm heading up Mountbatten Institute, India, sending Indians abroad to New York and London. So I'm a relative novice in the space of international education and internationalization in India. But from what I've noticed in the US, a key piece that supported me through my journey was something called NAFSA, the Association for International Educators. And I don't know if there's something similar in the UK as well. But from my observation, I haven't come across anything similar in India. It seems like there's a wide body of student counselors, international education counselors. And then to Professor Murthy's point, yes, we do have that need for an international department in universities. But what I've seen in universities abroad is, along with being headed by a dean or a professor, there's a huge sort of army of practitioners, the ones that have either studied abroad or have gotten a postgraduate degree in international education management. So I feel like those are the two missing pieces in the puzzle from my perspective. Again, being a novice, maybe there is something that exists. But this need for professionalizing international education in India, I would love your comments on that. Thanks.
Joanna?
Yeah, that's really interesting points you made, because of course in the US they have the International Institute of Education, which was founded in 1920 and promotes outward mobility. So the UK, the US and Japan have the lowest rates of outward mobility and the highest rates of inward mobility, or traditionally have done so. And they are all about promoting an international understanding of what it means to do exchanges. And they're very well established. In the UK, we have the international unit, which I used to work at, and they do work with Universities UK, but we also, as importantly, or more importantly, have the British Council, who again have been established for many, many years and are funded in a way that other European institutes like the Goethe are beginning to be less so. So I think that the British Council and IIE play a really important role in promoting the kind of exchanges that you've experienced and that make a difference to internationalizing institutions. And when I was in my role at the international unit, we didn't have an Indian equivalent to work with, which is an interesting point, because I think actually in terms of our earlier discussion about what do you need to internationalize in Indian HE, having an institution that stands outside the umbrella of the UGC, for example, or some of the accreditation agencies, and is all about promoting, working with, for example, the British Council on the sort of exchange programs, would be really helpful.
Chair.
We have perhaps one...
Can I just say one more?
Yes, sir.
I think in answer to your question, I think it's a really crucial one. I think universities have to see it as core business. And I think in many universities it's seen as the icing on top of the cake, I think. And I think until universities see it very much as part of the cake and part of the thing that's got to be, if you're going to do it properly. And I think, so I endorse all the points that Joanne made, but it's got to be, in all institutions across the board, it's got to be seen as a valuable thing to be doing, but to be doing it properly and to do it well.
Last two questions, I think, ma'am, you have one, and sir, you have one. Let's take both the questions and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
My name is Vartika, and Joanna mentioned Professor Christine and you from the University of Nottingham. I am the staff of University of Nottingham based in India, and currently working very closely with Christine to promote the Malaysia and the China campuses. So I have 2 points. One, I see that the industry in India is waking up to the fact that there are internationally standard set campuses of UK and other country universities in the Southeast Asian region. And in the last 6 months, my Malaysia campus has bagged more industrial research collaborations than the UK campus has in the last 3 years, which goes to say something about the leadership and the interest of the people from my Malaysia campus, plus the fact that I think Indian companies are also agreeing that there is talent and knowledge everywhere. My question to you, sir, is that how can we promote to the Indian students that as they step into workforce in India, there are great opportunities for them to work with universities overseas. Two, how can we also create possibilities and tell students that there are post-study work opportunities in a lot of countries in the ASEAN region, South Asian region and Southeast Asian region. Because as per our understanding and research, more than 7% per year is the increase of Indians going and working in countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and I'm not even talking about Singapore, which is the most popular hub anyway. Is there a way that the Indian government is already working or can work for the universities to be able to create an understanding about work opportunities, because UK, Australia and all are popular because of the post-study work thing, and I think UK is now losing on that to Canada and other places. Plus, can we also internationalize our education system, taking it one step forward by working with the government to allow post-study work visas of 1 or 2 years to international students who come here?
Very good point. So
I am Sunil Dayal from APJ. I've got one basic question is, what is this higher education? Is it for the employability or for the research? That is one of the biggest confusion India is having. You see, if you see the IIT, we are hearing a lot about IIT, but I want to ask one question about IITs. How many BTech IITians are doing MTech at IIT? Whereas IITians are teaching all over the world, but they are not teaching at our own IITs or IIMs. If you go to because I've been in the selection committee for my company, when we go to IIT, we find a lot of MTechs are coming for our company because our package was low. The MTechs of IITs are not BTech IITians are doing MTech. What is the reason? When the IIT is so good, why your students are not doing MTech from there? Why they are going abroad? It means it is the input, not the output of IITians. Because how many IITians are there in India who have become the CEOs than in US? My question is to Mr. Murthy, that in last 60 years IITs are existing. What changes have you made to become an international institute?
Would you like, anybody want to take the first question? I mean, what can we do? I think that's a very good point, that we need, if we're going to encourage students to come to India, international students, we also need to think about what happens post-education and give them those opportunities. I think at this point, frankly, our constraints are that we've not been able to build the fundamental opportunity for students to actually study in India, let alone work there. But it's a very good point. Thank you for pointing that. Professor Murthy, you want to talk about very quickly?
Yeah, we have heard such criticism of IITs for a very long time, and we have answered it also. Let me tell you, one thing, it is not true that some of the BTechs are not coming to MTechs. There have been instances where, there have been people with BTech from IITs have also done MTechs. It is there. Yeah.
But not many.
May not be. Okay, fine. And it may be true with most of the international universities also. Maybe BS from MIT may not do MS from MIT or whatever you may say. Okay. Now, but the thing is that the quality of students we are selecting to IITs for MTechs are also not low. They are among the top students from many of the good universities, etc. And I tell you, after 2 years of having gone through the IIT training, their value addition has gone up considerably. They themselves have told, they always say that, when they came out of their college, their whole technology potential were so low. And then when they say have gone through IIT, it has definitely gone up, etc. There are instances like that. And in fact, I spent in IIT, and of course afterwards I decided to relocate to Bangalore. But having gone to Bangalore and seen the institutions there, I definitely came to the conclusion IITs are distinctly apart. In fact, earlier I was not thinking like that. But now I am more convinced that definitely there have been lot of positive impact of IIT system to the country, technical education, internationalization, etc. You can always say they could do more, but I am sure they could do more, others can also do more. Okay? So the only thing is, there is no point in just say they are, in fact, only thing I would suggest that other institutions should also try to cultivate the IIT culture of autonomy, freedom, faculty selections processes, excellence and all these things. I am sure they can also come up. It is not.
I'm going to exercise Chairman's right. We've got the morning's agenda still to complete, so we're going to move on. I would like to make just one point. I set up a university. We have engineering students. I've had the opportunity the last 5 or 6 years to spend some time within the Indian higher education environment. I think we really have to dispel from our minds the notion that if a student does not qualify for a BTech at an IIT, that somehow that student does not have the potential to develop into an excellent academic, into an excellent person to go into industry, or an excellent person to go into government administration. I think all of the potential is there. I do not think that we can cleave the undergraduate population in India on the basis of one high stakes exam delivered under very strange circumstances and say that because you managed on that day to come up the trumps, you are somehow a more gifted student with better potential than those that didn't manage to do it. And I think it's the idea that IITs get the best students and therefore it's an input based, not an output based system. I think that has to be taken with a pinch of salt. Thank you very much for your participation. This has been a great session. I thank the panelists. We always learn a little bit more in these sessions, and I think we've done that today as well. We have a couple of things that we'd like to complete. The first is that I'd like to invite Professor Raj Kova to come and give a presentation on the first CIA survey on internationalization, and then after that we will go on to the release of the report and the ISB awards.